Hi everyone, welcome to a new chess video. We all have that funny friend who tries to beat us with the fool's mate. In case you don't know what the fool's mate is, it's this one right here. Notice that they'd come here with the bishop and the queen and checkmate us with these two pieces in just 3 moves. But notice that what we're going to show you in this video is not just how to beat it, but how to plenish it brutally because your friend has gone too far with the joke. Notice that here we can already make some huge mistakes when they bring out the queen on the second move, for example. We can't attack it directly because they'd check us and then take our rook on the next move. So we'd already be completely lost. We have to be extremely careful when they play the queen here and make the right moves, okay? What's the correct move you should make when they bring out the queen right away? You'll place the knight on c6 to defend this pawn, since for now that's the only thing they're attacking. Notice, for now they're not attacking this because it's defended by the king. We defend the pawn with the knight, and now they'll keep trying to give us the scholar's mate. Look, now the queen and the bishop are both targeting the f7 square. Now, we can't make the mistake of attacking the queen with the knight because they checkmate us on the next move. So now we really do have to play g6. Why? Because now they can't capture here or here since the knight is defending, so white has to retreat. Notice that if they put the queen on f3, they're threatening the scholar's mate again. Before, they were threatening it from here, now they're threatening it from here. So how should we continue? Well, the best way to continue is by developing our knight, which is no longer defended by the pawn but is now protected by the queen. So it's defending against the checkmate. Take a look at this position. Right now, our opponent has made 2 queen moves, so they've wasted time, while we've already developed both knights and have this little bishop hole ready to fianchetto our bishop and castle, and have our king super safe. Notice that here, the white pieces can try a few different things, and we're going to look at all of them. You already know that the main idea behind the scholar's mate is to come here and deliver checkmate. Now, what can black do that might bother white? What's our plan? Well, obviously, it's to come in here with the knight, threatening this queen, and also threatening to come in through the c2 square. Notice that. Imagine if they move the queen over here, we would come in with check and capture the queen. We even attack the rook as well. So, if we're threatening to come in with the knight here, white might think the following. How do I defend this square? Well, there are several ways to defend it. Probably the most common is developing their knight to e2. And I'll explain why. Notice that this knight had to be developed no matter what. So, its two best squares are f3, which it can't go to because the queen is there, and e2, which now it can. And besides, it would prevent us from jumping in with our knight. So here, a good move for white seems to be knight to e2. How should we continue? Well, we'll take advantage of the fact that we've opened up this space for the bishop, and we'll develop it via fianchetto. No rush, we don't need to hurry to break in because our position's much better. White can play d3 to develop their bishop, which is a totally logical move, and we can calmly castle. Look at what a great king position we have. Obviously, they've opened up this diagonal, they can keep attacking, but for now, we're not worried at all. What do we need to do? We need to attack the center, and I'll explain why. Look, when we've castled our king and our opponent hasn't, remember this, it's important to strike in the center. But before we strike in the center, we can make a couple of moves to pull this bishop back. Notice that if they trade this bishop for this knight, it actually benefits us because they're giving us the bishop pair. So the right move is to pull the bishop back while keeping the pin on the queen. What happens here is that we can keep going with the move g5 and will force the opponent's bishop to retreat even further since it only has one square and has to move to g3. It's true that it's now aiming at the e5 square, but for now, we don't need to defend it any further. Why? Because it's only being attacked by the bishop and we've already got it defended by the knight. What was I just telling you a moment ago? If I'm going a little fast, guys, please forgive me. It's just that I don't want this to end up being a half-hour video, so I'm going to try to explain it quickly. You can always rewatch the video. That's the good thing about YouTube, right? Like I was saying before, a good central attack should come when we've already castled our king and our opponent hasn't. So then, what would be a correct move here? Well, for example, d5. Notice that right now, this is a really good move, and I'm going to explain why. Since the king is in the center, we want to open up the center. And since our king isn't there, it's in our interest to open up the center so we can bring a rook in, make all sorts of moves here. And our opponent doesn't have a well-defined center or a safe king. So here we're threatening this pawn, but we're also threatening the bishop. Notice that if they move back, we would take this pawn and open up the center. So a good move for our opponent here would be to capture with e takes d5. All right, our opponent has captured. They're threatening this knight, but we could recapture this pawn, right? Let's take a look. We have a knight and a queen attacking this pawn. So since they have two pieces defending, we can't capture. We're just giving away the pawn. But wait, didn't you say, Chester, that this was a good move? Yes, because we have an in-between move by playing bishop to g4. Notice that we're attacking the queen. They can't keep defending the pawn because of the knight, so the queen has to move somewhere over here. And now, what could we do? Could we recapture the pawn? Yes, but we have an even stronger move, which is to jump with a knight. And notice right now what this knight is attacking. It's attacking the critical point we mentioned earlier. Now, we really can jump with the knight. Notice that if it were our turn again, we'd take on c2, check, and then capture the queen or the rook. So, we'd be completely winning. That's why this knight jump is incredibly powerful. Notice that the king is still in the center. What's the real problem? That the king is still in the center. What are the white pieces forced to do here? Capture this knight, no doubt about it. Why? Because if they don't capture this knight, as we've seen, we could come in through here. We recapture with the knight, and notice that we're opening up the files for the rook. Careful, because if it were our turn again, we'd win the queen. So, the queen is forced to capture here. But here, I'm going to show you some absolutely spectacular moves. For example, we have this check right here. The king has to move because, look, there's no piece that can get in the way. If the bishop tries to block, we would just keep attacking it with three pieces and win the bishop. So here, the king has to move. And check out this spectacular move we have here. We bring in the bishop, check, and the king can't go back into the pin. Why not? Because then we could break the pin, for example, by capturing here or however we want. I don't know what I just said, but it's fine. However we want. Now the king is forced to move here, and check out this absolutely spectacular move we have here. Knight to d7. Look at what a beautiful move this is. Knight to d7. We create a discovered attack on the queen with this bishop. And what's the interesting part about this position? Notice that the queen is trapped. This entire diagonal is controlled by the bishop. This rook controls this file, so the only way the queen could go is over here. And here's the pawn, and here's the knight. That's why the move knight to d7 is so good, blocking off this queen here. Notice that now the only way out for white to keep playing, the queen is going to be lost, is to capture over here. We simply capture the queen and look at the material advantage we've gained. We've won a queen for just a bishop. White has another way to threaten us with the scholar's mate, e4, e5, and instead of playing the queen first, they can also play the bishop first. You already know these are the two pieces that threaten our f7 square. Look, they start with the bishop first. We don't change our move. Knight to c6. You'll see that the plans are very similar. It's important to play knight to f6. Why? Because that way we defend this pawn, and if they play the queen here, we don't have to worry about this pawn. That's why I recommend that after bishop to c4, you play knight to c6, okay? So what happens here if white plays the queen over here? Look, it's extremely important, really important, not to make the mistake of playing knight to f6 to attack the queen, because then you'd get checkmated just like before. This is exactly what we talked about earlier. Knight to f6 is a mistake. Why? Because you get checkmated. So what's the correct move here? I'm sure many of you already know it from the previous answer, g6. We force the queen to move away. No, it's important not to play g6 when the knight is in here, because they capture this pawn. Now, yes, when we have this d5 pawn defended, we attack the queen with the g6 pawn so she has no options and has to retreat. So how do we continue? Well, obviously, as we said before, with knight to f6. Knight to f6. Now we're already blocking the checkmating. We've seen that our attack now was to jump in with the knight here. Earlier in the previous version, we saw how to defend it with knight to 2. Now, I'm going to show you how to do it if they defend with c3, because that's also a very common move. They don't want us to jump in here with the knight, so they play c3, and it seems like a good idea. Here, we're going to continue as before, bishop to g7. We want a castle as soon as possible, so we can attack the center. And notice that here they're going to continue with d3. Why? So they can develop their bishop. d4 would also be possible here, but they'd be opening up their own center, so that's not in their best interest. d3 is to be able to develop their bishop. We could continue with a simple theoretical move like castling or d6, but d6 doesn't really interest us. Why? Because we want to break directly with d5 without wasting any time, so we castle. Once we've castled the king, what do we need to do? Well, here they're probably going to pin us with the bishop, and our plan is pretty similar. We want to attack the center, but first we're going to attack this bishop, which will have to retreat, and once we attack it, we've got it cornered and can strike at the center with d5, just like in the previous example. Now they have to capture us. Notice that they're threatening our knight. This knight will never be able to jump through here, so what we're going to do is recapture with our knight. It'll be a little different from the previous example. Why? Because we have this pawn over here. Now we do. Now, we're coming up with some really good attacking ideas. I'm even going to recommend a move that's a little bit better than capturing directly with the knight, which would be the following. We'll place our bishop right on g4, attacking the queen. Notice that this queen only has one square to retreat to, so it's a forced move. Queen to e3. Notice that if it went to any other square, we would capture it. Queen to e3. And now, look, we could capture with the knight, and we'd still be better off. Why? Because now we're attacking the queen. And this is an important point, a vulnerable queen. If the queen were here, now white would have a lot more options. But as long as the queen is here, they're forced to capture this knight if they don't want to lose their queen. We'll capture here, and notice that we have a super powerful position. And I'm going to explain why. Let's analyze it little by little. We have a position where our queen is super active, attacking this spot here very strongly. Our bishop too. Both of our bishops, in fact, all our pieces are developed, while our opponent only has their bishop developed. Our king is castled and safe, while the opponent's king is still in the center. And we have some brutal attacks. For example, f5 and f4 to set up a fork over here. We have some incredible attacks. Notice that this bishop also cuts off all the king's escape routes over here. Therefore, we have a very winning position. But how can we continue? For example, here the opponent could have several ideas. First we need to notice our two threats. The first is to attack here, but the second is also this weak point. Notice that this pawn, why is it a weak point? Because there isn't any pawn defending it. Therefore, it's an easy target for attack. For example, with our rook or even with our bishop. If they play this move here, which seems the most logical to defend this point and also to threaten this bishop, which is f3, I'm sure all of you were thinking about it. So how should we respond? Well, we could act as follows. We pull back the bishop, and we'd be attacking this point, which could only be defended either by bringing the king over or by advancing this pawn, which would be really bad because it would open up the file. But we have an even better move than retreating the bishop, which is to play f5 and give up this bishop. Jastature, have you lost your Alling? Let's see, have I lost my mind? Yeah, is it a good move? Also, and I'll explain why. What happens if they take this bishop we just gave away? Well, we'd have a really strong move, which would be this one here, attacking both the queen and the bishop, so we get the bishop back. But we have an even better one, which is to capture this g2 square with the queen. And notice that now we're capturing the rook. They only have one move to save this rook, which is queen to f3. And we would switch sides, take the pawn on b2, and now there's really no way to save that rook. No matter what they play, we'll take the rook, we'll take the knight, and maybe a pawn or two from here, and the material advantage will be huge. So let's see how to punish this scholar's mate if white plays perfectly against us. We'll start, it doesn't matter if it's with the queen or the bishop, we'll always play knight to c6. If they come at us this way, we play g6, and when they retreat to f3, we'll bring our knight out here. That would be the main idea. How can we continue from this position? Notice that here, white can play knight to d2, which is actually the best move they can make in this position. We'll continue with bishop to g7, and notice that here, white might play the next move, knight to c3. You might ask, why? Well, precisely to protect this square right here. We want to play d5. If they play knight here, we can't do it. It's also likely that they'll play d3 right away to develop their bishop. In either case, we'll castle, and most likely the next move will be d3 if they played this one first, and if they played this one first, then knight to c3. Notice that now they don't let us play d5. Problem? Well, yeah, it's a bit of a problem, but let's switch up our plan. We have to settle for playing d6. Notice that now this pin is starting to become a problem, and I'll explain why. Because now, since we haven't played d5, they're threatening this knight jump, and the move bishop to g5 is starting to become a bit more serious of a problem. For example, here it's really important to play h6, just like before it was important, but now even more so, because to prevent this knight jump, it's important to kick this bishop out of here. Now they have two options: trade off the bishop, in which case we'll say thank you very much because they're giving us the bishop pair, and if they retreat, which is the most likely, we'll continue with our move g5 and force the bishop to fall back. So we'll gain a lot of space. Now we need to strike at the center. The thing is, it's a bit tricky for us right now. Notice that we can't play d5 right now because they have so many pieces attacking this square that it would just be giving away a pawn for nothing, and there wouldn't be any way to follow up. Here we have two very interesting options, and I'm going to explain both of them to you. First, let's take a look at this move here, which seems really interesting. Why? Because it attacks the queen and the knight. But before looking at that one, I'd rather show you the move bishop to e6, and I'll explain why. Notice that we're trying to trade these bishops. You might say, hey, chess teacher, but here you double your pawns, right, if you trade these bishops? That's right, you do double your pawns, but look how interesting this is. Right now, we're bringing in a queen, and we can set up some really powerful discovered attacks. Not here yet, but just to give you an idea, and this is starting to get dangerous. And besides, this pawn supports the d5 advance, which is exactly what we wanted. So this bishop move is really interesting. What's another really interesting move I mentioned to you? Obviously, knight to d5. We'll put this knight here, and notice why it's so interesting. First, we're creating a double attack with the queen and the c2 square. Look, notice that now, if they move the queen, we would capture here, check, and then take the queen. So we would be completely winning. Also, the only square this queen has is to come over here. So here, we would be winning material no matter what. The only move that saves them is to capture this knight, obviously, otherwise they'd lose the queen. We recapture with the pawn, and notice that this knight is pretty cramped. Careful, because I'm sure all of you are thinking about bringing the knight over here. That would be a huge mistake because this queen would get trapped and we'd win it. Look, it can't go anywhere thanks to this pawn. So, if they bring the knight over here, you've won the game. You capture the queen with bishop to g4. But another option is that they come forward here with the knight, and I'm going to show you a move that will really surprise you. The best move here is knight to h7. Check out what a wonderful move this is. And you might say, why knight to h7? If here, well, move your knight, I'll castle, do whatever you want, right? I'll castle long, I could even come over here later and break through all of that. Notice that this knight has gotten itself into trouble. We'll play the subtle move c6, attacking this knight. Notice that this pawn controls these two squares for retreat, so the knight can only go this way, and with a simple move like a5, this knight is completely lost. It can't go anywhere. At best, it can be given up for this pawn, but we'll just capture it and we've won a piece. Also, notice how well we're doing. We can break open the center at any moment, so we'd end up in a much better position.